Okay, when we finished chapter 1, we talked about the Spanish and their discovery and exploration of the Americas. We know that Spain colonized heavily during the 1500s, and that during that century, Spain would be the most influential and powerful country in Europe. Let's talk today a little bit about the English and the French and how they all fit into this picture. I'm going to start with the French because there's not a whole lot to say. Like the Spanish, the French, and the English, the Dutch as well, explored the Americas as an obstacle in their way to keeping them from getting to the Far East. So, excuse me. Much of the exploration done by the French was in the interior part of North America, the St. Lawrence River, and they're looking for what they call this mythical Northwest Passage. They were certain that if you came down the St. Lawrence, you went through the Great Lakes, there had to be a river, there had to be some way to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean through natural waterways. Of course, they never found that because such a thing does not exist. But what we end up with is a lot of exploration of natural waterways in North America, including the Mississippi River Basin. La Salle explores that, names it Louisiana, after King Louis. The French colonized, but the French never colonized like the Spanish and the English do. The French are predominantly trappers. The king always ruled the French. There was no colonial government system. Everything came from France, from the king directly. No one but nobility could own land in Louisiana. And so the people who would take the risk leave their homeland in France were not the people who needed land. The nobility had land. It was the lower classes that needed that opportunity, which was denied to them. So France, as a consequence, ends up with a fairly good relationship with the natives because there's not as many of them, and because they're trapping, they're not trying to establish farms, fencing off land, things like that. They kind of do what the Indians do, just with a different purpose of selling those furs back in Europe. The Dutch have a few claims. There was an Englishman who sailed on behalf of the Dutch, Henry Hudson, who claims the Hudson River Valley for the Dutch and establishes New Amsterdam, which will become New York. And when we talk about the colonies next week, we'll talk about the establishment of New York. Okay, now let's get to the English. We did have early English explorers in North America. John Cabot lands at Newfoundland in 1497. That's only 5 years after Columbus. But there's no colonization until the late 1500s, early 1600s, so why the delay? For the English, let me back up a little bit. We talked about the line of demarcation that the Pope divided the New World in between Spain and Portugal. So to challenge Spain's claim on America would be to challenge the church. So something has to happen to where England is no longer concerned with that. And of course you, I'm sure, remember the Protestant Reformation. King Henry VIII in England ends up severing ties with the Roman Catholic Church because he is seeking a divorce from his wife, Catherine of Aragon, whose parents were Ferdinand and Isabella. They had been married for several years. They had one child who lived past infancy, Mary, and Catherine was beyond the age at which she could have more children. So Henry becomes obsessed with this idea that he must leave a male heir to take over the rule of England when he dies. Well, obviously, he's not going to be able to do that with his wife, so he begins to seek out a new wife, and we know that he ends up with Anne Boleyn. Now, Protestantism, the Protestant Reformation had already occurred on mainland Europe. It just had not spread to England yet. Finally, Henry, in his various attempts to seek an annulment from the Pope keeps refusing him, coming up with excuses why he can't grant the divorce. Henry eventually breaks away. England then becomes followers of the Church of England, and instead of the Pope as its head, guess who's the head of the new church? The King. So he, in turn, acknowledges the divorce from Catherine and marries Anne Boleyn. England, of course, the people follow the religion of the ruler. They are now Protestant. Even though they've been Catholic for all these years, no one asked them, no one was concerned. And the Church of England followed all of the same practices, doctrines, just like the Catholic Church, except they did not have to answer to the Pope anymore. Henry goes and Anne have a child, a daughter, Elizabeth I. Things don't work out between Henry and Anne either. He ends up having her beheaded. He marries again Jane Seymour. He finally has a son, but the son is sickly, does not live very long. Henry does die. The son does become king for a short while, and then he dies. Well, by line of succession, who succeeds the male heir is the eldest female heir, and guess who that is? That's Mary. She and her mother had gone back to Spain to live with her family there, and she was raised devoutly Catholic and has much resentment against her father for the divorce and his converting England to Protestantism. Mary goes back into England, gets the nickname Bloody Mary. She has numerous Protestants executed. She lives about 3 years, and then she dies, which means now the throne goes to the last remaining child of Henry VIII, which was Elizabeth I. And I always love this story. It's the ultimate irony, because Henry's goal here is to leave the best heir he can for England, and Elizabeth I was one of, if not the best leader, monarch in English history. All of that background being said, Elizabeth's reign assured that England would remain Protestant. There would be no more back and forth. Of course, her mother was Anne Boleyn, who was Protestant. She was the product of that first Protestant marriage. And we have some early attempts in the late 1500s at English colonization. But frankly, the English found it easier to steal from the Spanish. Yes, they were legally supported pirates, basically. As the Spanish galleons transported tons of gold and silver from Central and South America back home to Spain, in ships that were relatively old, we're talking late 1500s now, the English continue scientific improvement. They are sailing smarter, they are sailing smaller, faster ships, and they are able to steal from the Spanish. So much so that the treasury in England is growing incredibly, and they are not having to put out any risk in the colonization process. When Sir Francis Drake circumnavigates the globe. He stole from the Spanish on the Pacific coast of South America. That had not been done before. Only Spanish conquistadors had sailed on the Pacific Ocean, at least by traveling westward. Sir Francis Drake steals from the Spanish. He decides he is too heavy laden to travel back through the Pacific. The Spanish will catch him for sure. And so he decides, my only choice is to continue sailing the Pacific until I get back to Europe. So that's what he does. Takes him 3 years, but he arrives back. Elizabeth knights him. He is the hero of England. And needless to say, the Spanish are real tired of being stolen from by the English. King Philip II of Spain decides the time has come for him to do something about England. This is the former husband of Elizabeth's sister Mary. To make things more complicated, Philip had proposed to Elizabeth, and she had rejected him. And so Sir Francis Drake is the final straw, and he decides England must be punished and taught a lesson. They need to be returned to Catholicism and punished for their piracy. So in 1588, that's a date you need to remember, we of course have the defeat of the Spanish Armada by the English. And the battle takes place in the English Channel. A storm comes up that gets nicknamed the Protestant Wind. This is divine intervention, or viewed, of course, as divine intervention, that England is to supersede Spain in European domination, which they do. 1588 is kind of the turning point, which we begin to see the decline of the Spanish and the rise of the English. And for the next 300 years or so, we're going to see England be the dominant world power. And of course, the British Empire grows to include Australia, China, India, and of course, the English colonies in North America. So once England's security on the seas is established by their defeat of the Spanish, their ability to attempt a colony and support a colony is going to be greatly increased. Lots of problems in England at this same time. There was a large unemployment. We had a larger population in England than we had previously seen. Remember all of those foods that were transferred back through the Columbian Exchange? The population had a better diet, they were living longer, and they could have more children. Also, the rule of primogeniture, which said, this was the law, that only the eldest son could inherit land. So if you had 6 kids, 6 sons, let's say, only the eldest could inherit your land. The other 5 were out of luck. So if they wanted a chance to own their own land, America's going to offer that opportunity for them. Also, once people begin pooling their money together in joint stock companies, it's going to be able to finance and support an attempted colony much more so than if just one individual tries to do it, or if the Queen or the government tries to do the founding. So that ends for now, and I'll see you next time.